Good evening and welcome to On the Record. My name is Jasser. This was supposed to be an auspicious week for the European Union at the start of the 5-year term of its new Executive Commission and Parliament. Instead, we saw delays with Commission nominations and a row between Germany and its EU neighbours over Berlin's decision to introduce controls at all of its borders. On the record, the German government says this is a temporary measure to counter irregular migration. In practice, the decision undermines Europe's core principle of freedom of movement and shows that a country which is supposed to be the driving force of European integration has a curious propensity to act with little regard for its partners.
For months, German police have been conducting random checks at the country's borders with Poland, the Czech Republic, Switzerland, and Austria. Starting Monday, the controls will extend to Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz argues the controls have already significantly reduced irregular migration, despite irritating Poland and others.
We have been successful with this and we will continue this successful approach. Incidentally, we are also doing this, although it is becoming difficult with our neighbors.
Poland reacted furiously to the decision, siding with analysts who saw the move as a reaction to the Chancellor's poor electoral showing in the local elections in Saxony and Thuringia, where anti-immigration parties scored big victories last week.
This type of action is unacceptable from the Polish point of view. After all, I have no doubt that it is the internal political situation in Germany which is causing these steps to be implemented and not our policy towards illegal immigration on our borders. Today, we need the full support of Germany and of the entire European Union in helping to organize, fund and arm our eastern border, including in the context of illegal migration.
To get to the bottom of this story, I'm joined here in the studio by Andrzej Byrt, former Polish Deputy Foreign Minister, Ambassador to Berlin and Paris as well. Welcome.
Good morning, rather, although it's afternoon.
And joining us remotely from Berlin is Professor Daniela Schwarzer, a Management Board Member at Bertelsmann Stiftung and a leading European Union analyst. Welcome, Professor Schwarzer.
Thank you very much. Very happy to join you.
So to get straight into business, Ambassador Byrt, Poland said it was calling on the EU to react, but Chancellor Scholz insists that this is normal, this is part of the rule book, it's temporary and it's working. So is Poland overreacting?
Let's say that it's a reaction, German reaction on the situation within Germany, particularly the results of the last two elections in the Ostländer, in Thüringen and in Saxony, and as well as the sentiments which exist in Brandenburg, which is the next election place, which will take soon. So that's to a certain extent, fight against right-wing extremists who are basing their arguments.
But is it a fight against right-wing extremism, or is it, as some analysts are arguing, caving into right-wing and left-wing extremists for that matter?
I would say it's a very pragmatic step made by the political authorities of Germany to slow down the arguments being presented by Alternative für Deutschland, which is a right-wing movement in Germany, which is basing its argumentations on fears which may exist in heads of some of the German citizens. So they say, we would like to show that the German government is using the instruments which are included into the Schengen Agreement.
Okay, but presumably Prime Minister Tusk understands this. So why is he reacting? So why is he reacting so strongly? Why is he calling on other EU partners to do something about it?
Well, he knows very well the reaction of all the other EU partners, and they are not very fond of. So he probably would like to remind our German friends that this has to be a temporary sanction or mean to be used legally with the rules of the Schengen Agreement. and then to take into account the fact that it has to strengthen their own internal policy so as to stop dangers of such dramatic events like the one in Solingen.
Right. Okay. Now, Professor Schwarzer, what is your view on this? You know, Poland is arguing that irregular migration, the challenge requires strengthening the external borders of the EU rather than playing fast and loose with internal borders and undermining Schengen.
I think it is correct that we need a longer-term solution, which can only consist in developing our way of processing migration at the EU's external borders. However, the measures now taken by Germany are seen as temporary by the current government. I understand the criticism and the fears that come with Germany pulling up its borders. And I also think that a lot more could have been done to communicate and explain what is happening and why it is happening. But of course, and here I agree with the analysis shared by the ambassador, the reason why this is happening now and why this is happening so rapidly is the domestic political situation in our country. It is not just the two regional elections which brought migration-critical parties into strong positions. It is also another regional election coming up at the end of this month. And then there are federal elections at the latest in September 2025. I'm giving all of these dates to show that the domestic pressure will remain high on the current government, which has really lost in terms of support. Citizens look at the policies very critically. However, it is really the far right and to some extent the far left that has put the migration issue so central. And
but
so
in normal circumstances, we will already have some reaction from the European Commission, right? At the moment, the Commission, is it because the Commission is in transition or are they watching the situation? Normally, they would defend the Schengen, the free travel arrangements in Europe. It's pretty striking that, you know, now we're talking about 9 countries in the heart of Europe.
Yes, I think there are 2 reasons. One is I think the German case is being investigated, and even within the German debate, there are competing opinions. Some argue this perfectly fits the Schengen regime. There's a temporary measure that has been put up, and it will, when it is withdrawn, we are back to Schengen. So it's not seen as undermining Schengen, but using the provisions of Schengen. But there are others, also legal scholars, who argue that the conditions for these measures, which would essentially mean a state of emergency, a sudden momentum that requires drastic measures, is not really given. And this needs to be solved. And I think before that is solved, the European Commission can't pronounce itself. And the other reason is indeed that we are in a transition phase in Brussels as well. Although the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has been reconfirmed, the Commission as such is in transition. So I would expect this issue to take some time to be tackled by Brussels.
So there's no one to react. Yeah. Is that what you're saying?
Well, there is someone. Of course, the Commission President is there. But as I said, it would not be the moment to make a political judgment on this matter. It is a legal question which isn't entirely solved at the moment, and we have 2 competing readings of this. If you listen to the German Chancellor, he will state something that is in opposition to what the Prime Minister of Poland has said about the measures, right. And I think legal scholars equally disagree over the matter.
Right. Well, I'm delighted that both of you agree that there's a measure of politics in all this, domestic politics. And this is what the Prime Minister of Poland also said, but he's not alone. Let me read you this quote from Jörg Lau, a veteran German journalist and commentator. He said, quote, "Political competition in Germany is now about shutting the borders to our neighbors, dialing down Ukraine assistance and refusing common European debt for much-needed investment. Europe's supposed lead nation is dropping the ball." Would anyone dare to defend Germany? Here in this studio. Ambassador, you have the appetite to defend Germany.
Well, no, I would say that the German government is facing now one of the most difficult periods in the history of post-war after the unification of both parts of today's Federal Republic of Germany. And I think this value, which is to stabilize the democracy within the country, is worth taking sometimes dramatic decisions. That's one of them. That's one of them. I remember, I still have in front of myself, when I was obtaining in the year 2000, I think 3, from the hands of the then Interior Minister of German government, Otto Schily, the first rules of Schengen Agreement as the first of the new countries likely to join the European Union in 3 years' time. And then I remember we've been discussing at the time exactly these cases where the Schengen Agreement can be suspended for a while, and for which occasion, he said at the time, only in a dramatic situations, and we are just living through such a period.
So I'm not sure Professor Schwarzer will agree with this assessment that the situation is really so dramatic in Germany when it comes to migration. The number of asylum seekers has dropped significantly from last year, down by 30 or 40%. And it seems that it's a bit of a panic reaction on the part of the Chancellor, not really paying attention to what effect it has on partners, on the EU coherence, and so on and so forth. So again, I find it ironic, and I'm all ears to hear your opinion about this, that the irony is that instead of being successful, this strategy, he's now getting praise from far-right leaders saying, brilliant move, finally you joined our cause. Isn't that embarrassing for a social democrat chancellor, Professor Schwarzer?
It is correct to say that the numbers of asylum seekers arriving in Germany is down compared to last year or years before. There have been peaks. Remember the year 2015 when Germany took in about 1 million of asylum seekers from Syria in particular, but also Afghanistan and other neighboring countries. So the situation today is no longer that, but the total number of people that have come to Germany and that still have a status where they can't be fully integrated into the labor market and hence need to be supported financially, need to be hosted, and all of these practical things that come with it. That is indeed a strain, in particular on municipalities. And some of them, not all of them, some of them feel they are really at a limit and can't take in more. This is where this debate comes from, we can't take in more. It's not the actual number of arrivals per day, but it is the fact of handling many that have arrived over time and giving them a decent chance to live and integrate into structures and German society.
Yes, but there is, of course, it's all true. I can appreciate that. But at the same time, it was Germany that made, again, a unilateral decision back in 2015 to open the borders and say, we sharpened us, we managed this, everybody's welcome. So in a sense, now that it's problematic, it's shifting the responsibility to its neighbors.
Yes, and we discussed that, I think, on the show, that there is a lot of short-termism and political reaction in what we are seeing happening now. It's the elections, it's the fact that European policy does not yet bring the results that everyone wishes for, that there is no problem with a single market and borders can be kept open because there is a good European system that handles migration collectively. And what we don't see right now is the full implementation of the European laws that have been passed, so there is some hope. But it is true that Germany has badly surprised some of its neighbors with the recent measures, and that there is a lot of criticism. So I think we are at a moment in time where consultations with our neighbors are really crucial. Also, the announced short-term measures, they need to come to an end, and there needs to be a transparent communication by the political leadership in Berlin as to the point when this moment is and what is then going to be done.
So let's just go back for a moment but let's go back for a moment just to the pure politics of it. Is it going to work for Chancellor Scholz, Or is it going to be too little, too late, an embarrassing retreat? And again, I want to go back to this endorsement by the likes of Viktor Orban or Geert Wilders. You know, in other words, is Chancellor Scholz credible in these activities? And is it going to improve his result in the next local election this weekend?
I think the question is bigger for him in terms of rebuilding trust among German voters and regaining points in opinion polls. It cannot just be migration, but indeed migration is the most pressing issue that in particular far-right and far-left politicians who are migration critical have really pushed onto the domestic agenda. That comes with a huge price, and we discussed the European implications. There's also a domestic implication, because if a political leader services the far-right's arguments in a way that the distrust within society vis-a-vis migrants increases, the situation domestically gets more and more difficult. And it is not just Olaf Scholz, you know, he has a moderate tone when he speaks about migration, but we see other, in particular conservative politicians, who really use parts of the rhetoric that the far right has brought to the forefront. But the Chancellor, indeed, after regional elections, which haven't brought great results for the SPD, quite the contrary, and 1 year ahead of the federal elections, will have to do much more than just working on migration to recredibilize a story, what the Social Democrats stand for in Germany, and that must go beyond migration. That has to concern economic policy and other elements.
Right. Okay. Well, let's go back to Polish affairs for a moment. There were high hopes that the change of government in Poland would lead to better cooperation, maybe German-Polish leadership of the EU. But Prime Minister Tusk seems increasingly frustrated with Germany on a number of issues. It's not just the question of migration, but also, you know, the question of compensation for victims of Nazi Germany, some of the EU policies, lack of decisive leadership, if you will. What does it tell you about the future? What can we expect in terms of Polish-German relations?
The change of government in Poland as a result of the elections on 15th of October last year has changed, I would say, the overall climate as far as the attitudes towards the bilateral contacts are concerned. But then there is still a number of questions which have to be treated in a very pragmatic way. And you rightly notice the fact that our Prime Minister has expressed some doubts concerning, for instance, the sometimes too slow reaction of our German partners on certain vital issues, like, for instance, compensation towards still living and still being reduced small group of those who did survive the Second World War but were dramatically touched by the aftermath of it. There is also some things concerning exactly these blockage of our frontiers, some other things. But the major point, however, is that the European Union is an organization which was growing over years as a result in conflicts and through dialogue. So I'm not afraid that such things have surfaced and were officially presented. I think that as a result of that, our contacts, German and Polish contact, will have to be more intensive. And I think both sides have already noticed it, this need for speeding up our dialogue. And
well, you're speaking like a true diplomat, always optimistic.
always trying to find an exit from a conflict-oriented or potentially conflict-directed situation. So I would say I wouldn't like to over-dramatize both presentations by our Prime Minister, saying he said openly what he thought, and now it's time to face those potential minor or bigger conflicts and try to solve it.
All right, I surrender. Let's draw the line under this, and let's move to the second topic today, which is Mario Draghi's report on the future of Europe.
Mario Draghi's much-anticipated 400-page report makes 5 key points. The European Union must mobilize at least 750 billion euros annually to compete with the US and China. China's state-backed competition poses a threat to the EU's clean tech and automotive industries. The EU must stem its brain drain, stop the exodus of promising startups, and boost innovation to keep up with the US and China. To reduce dependence on China in critical industries, the EU must prioritize trade agreements with other resource-rich countries. EU member states must align their defense spending and procurement to boost their power against threats emanating from Russia. Draghi, who as president of the European Central Bank was credited for saving the euro during the great financial crisis, warned EU leaders that failure to reform would push Europe into a terminal decline.
Do this, implement your report or die.
It's do this or it's a slow agony.
Well, people in that room laughed, but is it a laughing matter, Professor Schwarzer?
No, it's a very, very serious report. It's a very good report. And the diagnosis that Mario Draghi presents is sober, but absolutely true. I mean, he speaks about lowered productivity, the question of our future workforce, aging population, the need for investment into infrastructure, research and development. This is a very long list, but I think every single point on it is extremely important. So in a way, it's a big wake-up call, and it comes at the right moment, just at the beginning of the new 5-year term. And European leaders and the European Commission, I think, really should work by his playbook, because he has a very holistic view of Europe's competitive challenge. And he names very clearly to what extent we are as Europeans under global geo-economic and geopolitical pressures. So we need to take care of our own competitiveness, precisely because we are living in a far more volatile security environment. We need to protect our assets and what we have in terms of economic strength, and we will in the future have to spend more on defense. And so for that, we need a solid economic base.
Right, but it seems to me, that reaction in both Germany and Poland to the report actually wasn't very strong. In Germany, because it's consumed by these domestic considerations. As a matter of fact, in Germany, the main point discussed about the Draghi report was that it would involve more debt, which is a favorite topic in Germany, rather than concentrating on some of the more constructive proposals, what to do, for example, about the European auto industry. So is this report going to go back? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is precisely the wrong debate that we are having in Germany right now. And again, it is, I think, an expression of the domestic political situation. There's one trigger word, and that's European debt in the report. And rather than discussing what we need to do, we discuss what we surely don't want to do. And I think Germany, which is more than a quarter of the GDP of the Eurozone, should read Draghi's list of deficiencies really as one that very much also concerns Germany. And the solution we need to find for our own domestic economic model has so much to do with the European Union, because we are very open, very export-oriented. We need the single market. And there is a need in the German debate, but also in the European Union as a whole, to really change the mindset and change the narrative about growing together and becoming more competitive together. And right now what we are seeing is a no to joint funding. And I think that's really the old thinking, that if Germany pays, it's for the others. My view is completely different. We need to invest in Europe, and we need to do so together. We need to find the best way of raising money in the financial markets. To fund
We've already done that as Europe before, right? Around COVID. That was a successful operation, and it didn't really cost German taxpayer that much, or did it?
No, and I think that is a real model. The Next Generation EU Fund, which was put out at the time of COVID to fund economic transition, green transition, digital transition, and to help the economy back on its feet to foster growth. That is an example. The conditions for this borrowing were very good. Also, there was an interesting element of attaching conditionality to the European money spent, meaning, for instance...
I have to interrupt. I'm sure conditionality is not a word that Ambassador Byrt will like to hear. what's your view on conditionality for EU money?
That's not the major problem. The major problem is, which has been treated, and the Draghi was absolutely right to show his report, is that the European Union has been left behind the two big powers, world powers, which is today still the United States and China. He gave in his report a number of cases where, for instance, European unicorns, which means new startups which make 1 billion EU of turnover per year, 1/3 disappeared and went to the United States. Why? Because the United States is the country which gave freedom, economic freedom, the priority, which have remained in, we got stuck into red tape. And that's why, among others, I'm, as you have already noticed, to a certain extent shocked that no Polish politician, or even better, such scientists like Leszek Balcerowicz, so far hasn't said anything about the report. Poland is the country which should have now its real presentation, what we did, because during the last 35 years, since our change, Poland was the country who presented a dynamism which was unmatched by any other EU country. I'm very sorry to say to my colleague from Germany, we had much higher speed growth rate than had our friends from Germany. That was a very big approval of the fact of the efficiency of the political change in Poland. But it concerns the European Union. We were overruled by over-regulations. It concerns both Poland and Germany and very many other European countries.
And Draghi mentioned that, by the way.
Yes, exactly. That's the point. To give entrepreneurs, but also ourselves, the authorities, economic authorities of all the EU member countries, more freedom. Say them, stop producing over-regulation. It strangles the initiative.
I'm sure everybody would agree with this, but the thing seems to be that there is still lack of political will to implement this.
Well, that's true.
Let's see what happens in the coming weeks. Ambassador Byrt, thank you very much for being with us. Professor Schwarzer, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching. This was On the Record, and I hope to see you next week.